Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm going to be sharing with you today a recipe that I found online for a maple glazed smoked salmon. It is phenomenal. One of the easiest things that I've smoked. And here's my smoker, my trusty smoker. I'll put a link in the description below for you. And here are the slices and cuts of salmon that I'm going to be smoking today. Nice big juicy cut straight from Seattle. Very excited about this. So you're going to need some salt. You can't use just regular salt, a measuring cup, and some brown sugar. First thing you'll do is put your salmon slices into a container that is deep enough so that when you fill it with liquid, it completely covers up your salmon pieces. So what we're going to be doing is making the brine first. And so let me slide these out of the plastic. And you can see my container is indeed deep enough. It's not too shallow. And you obviously want to debone any salmon that you have. There's a variety of ways you can do this. Some people prefer to do it after they cook. I definitely prefer to do it beforehand. It's much easier. Little tip here, use a needle-nosed pliers and make sure you pull the bones out in the direction of the meat. If you pull them backwards or to the side, you're going to sever the meat and tear it up, and it's just not going to look very pretty, and also allow for an escape point for some of the juices inside. So you'll want to definitely pull that with the grain of the salmon. Use your finger to kind of identify where those bones are. And you'll obviously put the skin side down in your container, right? All right, so with those in position and with everything thoroughly deboned to the best of my capacity here, I don't feel any protrusions coming out from the salmon. I'm going to add my brown sugar. And my salt. Now I'll put a link in the description below for the specific salt that I like to use, but I'm just going to sprinkle some salt on there. Again, you cannot use regular table salt for this. You're going to create some unsavory flavor, some bitterness that you might not be interested in, or at least that's the theory behind it. And then I'm just going to fill it with water. You can use exactly, four cups, or just kind of however you can ballpark it to however much it takes to completely submerge your salmon slices. And this is the brine, like I said. This is going to sit overnight in the brown sugar, salt, and water mixture. And the brining process just helps to preserve it and make it a little fresh. It gets some of that moisture out of there, and the fish will actually take in some of that salt. And this is an important step so that when you go to dry it the next day, which I'll show you in just a minute, it'll help keep it fresher longer, right? Because you're going to keep well, I'll explain in just a second. But before I leave it overnight, I'm just going to kind of rub that brown sugar into the fish just lightly, and I'll cover that up. I want to make sure all that brown sugar is pretty much dissolved and not clumping on the bottom, right? And I'll cover it up with some saran wrap and then pop it into the refrigerator overnight. Now, depending on the size of your slices, you may only prefer to do a 4-hour brine or an 8-hour brine or a 24-hour brine. That kind of depends on what's going on. Now, this is my smoker. We'll kind of take the cover off here for you. This is my particular setup, just to show you a little bit what I'm dealing with and what I'm going to be cooking this salmon on today. So let me take this cover off. And I'm definitely a novice smoker. There is nothing advanced about this particular setup. It's an electric smoker, and I'm pretty happy with it so far. Just a quick little tour if you're interested. I've got my grates here and my water tray and my wood chip tray. There's from my previous cook. All right, so here we are the next day. So about 10 to 12 hours later. I'm going to take the slices out of the fridge and uncover them, and we are next going to begin the drying process. Now, if you've ever smoked salmon before, you know that it basically omits this white fatty material as you cook it, right? So the drying process, what we're going to be doing here in just a second, is going to help to seal up the salmon slices. Okay, so what you're going to do is take it out of your brine and pat it down, get all that excess moisture and all that kind of liquid, running liquid off of there. Doesn't have to be perfect. And you are going to be transferring this to your smoker's grate. So let's go ahead and get that off of there and onto the grate. This is going to maximize air circulation and exposure to your slices of salmon here. So let me get both of those on there. And just pat dry it again too, make sure there's no pooling liquid. You can see where I've kind of gouged the part of the fish with the bone. Okay, so the next step, we're going to actually use the leftover brine. You can actually recycle this, stir it up really nice. This has the salt, remember, and the brown sugar, and I'm going to be actually using this to smoke it instead of just water in my water pan. And that'll just help create some extra flavoring. So I'm just going to cover that up for the moment and put it in the refrigerator. Just going to let that hang out there for a while the salmon actually dries. So the drying process kind of starts now after you patted all the liquid off. I'm going to bring it outside. It happens to be kind of a cool day, and that's important. You don't want to put it in 90-degree heat. And I'm going to turn on our ceiling fan or our porch fan outside here. And that's going to create, obviously, some circulation. The idea here is that you cool it in a temperature that is around 50, maybe 60 degrees at the warmest, and maybe it's out in the wind, right, if you don't have a fan, in the shade. And we're just going to let that air kind of cool as much of the surface area as possible. Here's a look at the current temperature. This is kind of early in the morning, the next morning after the brine, so it's kind of cool. It will warm up, though, during the drying process, and that's fine. And next up, I'm just going to grab my materials, prepare them. I've got my extension cord. Now, if you are running an electric smoker, for example, the one that I have listed below in the description, make sure you get a cord that is capable of holding the proper amperage. This thing pulls quite a bit of amperage from your electric system, and you don't obviously want to have a fire or a melted cord on your hand. This is basically the setup. I've actually decided to elevate my salmon a little bit. Looks kind of silly, but I'm going to put it more directly under that itsy bitsy fan that you see here. It actually puts out quite a bit of air in the downward position. And so that's kind of how you're going to do it. And you're going to cool it for anywhere from, I don't know, 2 to 4 hours. I kind of did mine for a good 4 hours. And look at that surface. You can see this almost lacquer-like, this kind of, not polyurethane, but this like shiny kind of seal. It's not actually wet when I touch it. It creates this barrier seal over the fish, okay? And as I mentioned before, that's going to actually seal in some of that albumin, some of that white stuff that tends to seep out if it's too high. And that's going to help it retain a lot of its flavor and seal everything in really well. Okay, so that's the theory behind that. Now, when your salmon is properly dried out, and by the way, you don't have to worry about it because that salt from the brine that you put it overnight in, it's going to help preserve it. So you don't have to worry about your fish necessarily going bad. Again, obviously, you don't want to put it out in the hot sun or have it sit out for too long. So that's up to you to figure out and monitor. Now that the salmon is indeed dried, I'm gonna put it onto some tin foil. This is gonna help just keep things kind of clean for me. And we'll get out our water tray that has the brine in it. And next, I'm gonna get out my smoke, my wood tray for my smoker, and I've decided I want, based on my last smoke, there wasn't enough smoke coming out, so I'm just going to enlarge those holes a little bit while I'm at it here. This is obviously my setup, not yours, but just wanted to show you that if you need more smoke coming out inside your smoker, you might want to consider enlarging those holes. I'm going to get my wood chips wet a little bit. This will help reduce how frequently I have to change the wood chip tray and put fresh stuff in there. So I'm just going to get that a little wet, and I might add some more water to it later here. And this is the setup. We have the cooled, the dried, the sealed salmon, and obviously my trays here. So I will extend the extension cord, get this baby plugged in. And while I'm doing that, I absolutely love this smoker. I'll show you this little handy little wheel system that I have for it later, but could not speak more highly of it. Again, I'll put a link in the description below if you are in the market for one. It's definitely a good entry-level smoker that will give you some really nice flavors. All right, so with that plugged in, I'm going to go ahead and load up my brine here and make sure my drip pan is nice and clean. And my wood chip tray. All right, and I'm going to seal the doors. And I'm going to turn this on. And I'm going to bring the temperature up to about 150. That's kind of what my starting temperature is going to be. I don't want to get it too high. However, I want to find that balance where it actually creates some of the smoke. So I'm going to put my salmon in, and it has reached 150 degrees, or at least. And it's actually been in for about 30 minutes now. So let's just check on it here. Kind of skipped a step. I didn't actually show you the salmon going in, but that's what it looks like going in. And nothing has really been done yet, but you can see it's definitely not on too high of a heat. My smoker is at a good temperature. You can see there it's starting to sweat maybe a little bit. See, there's some liquid coming off of the salmon that was not there before. So that's good. That's what I want to see. Let me seal this back up, and we will come check on it later. All right, so after about 30 more minutes, so it's been in about an hour at a nice 150 degree temperature. You can see it beating and sweating quite a bit. If you see any white albumin, by the way, you're going to know that you've done something terribly wrong. So next up, we're going to put some, we're going to do our baste here. So let's put some maple syrup, and you can use honey or anything sweet, but I like to use maple syrup. It's a really nice flavor. Now, you don't want to overdo the maple syrup here. It's pretty potent stuff. So, you know, you can put it on lightly. I recommend one coating. And again, you're going to want to put this on. You surely could put it on at the beginning of your cook, but I'm going to put it on after about an hour after the salmon has sweat a little bit. So this is my preference. There's no right or wrong. And we'll get it back in there, and I'm going to actually bring the heat up a little bit more. I want to actually see some visible smoke coming out just for a short period of time, maybe 5-7 minutes, to just get some of that nice cherry wood. I'm using cherry wood chips, by the way. Some of that cherry wood flavoring, attaching it to the actual glaze that I've just put on there, that baste of maple syrup that I just put on there. I want that smoke to be infused with it. So let's go ahead and pop that in. You can see how deliciously smoky that looks. Now, obviously, the more that I have the door open, the more that heat's going to escape. So when you're doing this, you obviously want to be a little faster at it. Obviously, I have a camera, so okay, we'll put that back in. Let that smoke kind of saturate that glaze, like I said. Note the temperature; it's about 175. And I'm just gonna, and it's gonna fall. The temperature's gonna fall a little bit because the door was open, and then it's gonna heat back up. Now I'm gonna kill my heat a little bit here because with all that smoke and those wood chips going, it's actually, even with it off, it's gonna actually bring up the thermostat a little bit. So I'm gonna crack the door slightly. Again, I don't want to overcook my salmon. That's one of the worst things you could do when you are cooking a salmon, is bring the temperature too high for too long or too fast. So again, I'm gonna, after that smoke has infused, I'm gonna try to bring it back down to about 150 as my optimal temperature. And you might be asking yourself time-wise, well, how long does this whole smoking process take at about 150? I did a good 4 hour with my particular setup, but that obviously depends on a lot of context, a lot of factors that I can't account for. So on your end anyway. So I can't recommend a specific time. You're definitely going to want to measure it by internal temperature. Now, another hour later or so, feel free to give it a nice little coating, additional coating. And again, use it sparingly. The maple syrup, if you're using pure maple syrup, packs quite a punch. So don't think that you're going to be giving it better flavor by putting more of it on. All right, I'm going to check my wood chips. Everything looks good. They're not blackened at this point. And let me check my brine tray here. Make sure that has not, oh, got a little spillage, but yep, that's congealing pretty well. So there's no evaporation. That again tells me my temperature is not too hot here. Now, while we're waiting, I will show off my cool little wheeled handmade do-it-yourself stand for my smoker. I just took some 2x4s and some pads that you put kind of on the bottom of the furniture so it doesn't scratch your floor, and just kind of I spray painted the 2x4s and put some sealant, some outdoor sealant on it, and then threw these wheels on with lockable front wheels. And I can wheel it wherever I'd like. This little bar here, I just had a piece of black scrap metal lying around, and I just attached it as shown. I didn't actually drill into the smoker, it's just resting atop. So if I do want to take it off of there, it's literally a matter of just kind of picking the unit up over those little metal edges. And so I love this because if you noticed, I was actually smoking earlier on my porch, but because of the sun out there and the temperature kind of affecting the smoker, I decided to bring it under my screened-in porch. So I just kind of wheeled it in. Anyway, all right, back to business here. So I brought the temperature up a little bit more. If you noticed our last step, we just put another glaze on, and so I wanted to infuse a little bit more smoke with that maple syrup glaze. Again, making sure that the overall temperature doesn't get too hot for too long of time. Again, I kind of did a 5 to 7 minute at about 200 degrees or so, and really monitoring it to make sure that it didn't get too hot. You could see it starting to turn a little brown or a little darker pink at some of the tips. So that tells me things are moving along really well. Again, you don't see any of that thick white fatty albumin stuff leaking out. And that's really important, right? That's a sign that your temperature is too high and that your fish is going to be too dry. So we've been approaching about 3 hours here, and I'm just gonna do a temperature check to see what the internal temperature of the meat is. Now, anything around 145, as I understand it, is a pretty good temperature. That may depend on your own personal preferences. You can see with this particular slice, we're a little high. Let me pull back my thermometer. Yep, there we go. So my thermometer was a little too deep there. We're about 138 in the middle of kind of the fattest part of the slice of the salmon there. And I'll poke this one too, just for comparison. Don't want to go too deep where it goes underneath and gets hotter than it actually is. This one is a little thicker, and it's got a little bit more to go in terms of reaching that internal temperature of about 145. All right, so about an hour later, I have a temperature of 145, a little bit below, and I'm just going to let these babies sit out. We are done with the smoke. We are done cooking it with the smoker. So look how beautiful that looks. The texture is kind of sticky on the top and just a little bouncy, not squishy. Again, the internal temperature was fine, so I know that it's cooked all the way through. But this is what it looks like coming out. Now it's kind of unsightly on the edges, so feel free to kind of scrape away some of that fat that has kind of come out during the process. And I let it sit and rest for about 20 minutes or so before serving it. But this is it. Its final product here. It cuts like butter, just no effort required. And there's a better look at the inside here. It's got beautiful coloring. It has retained all of its moisture and juices. Again, you could, going back to that sealing process when we dried out the salmon earlier, right? That you basically just avoided all that delicious juice kind of coming out of the salmon and drying it out. Now I'm going to happen to pair it with a homemade bread here, and we are really looking forward to a delicious meal. A couple more views for you of the salmon paired with the homemade bread and some paprika sprinkled homemade mashed potatoes. All right, look at that beautiful pink texture once more. Just another shot there for you. All right, one of the best meals I've ever had. I highly recommend it. Hope this video has been helpful. Hope you enjoy your delicious salmon. Take care and thank you so much.